There was an article that got a little bit of attention in the carnivore world a few days ago, where a philosopher got this piece published asking a rather absurd question that's very dark in nature. Do we as human beings have a moral duty to save the life of a stranger if that stranger eats meat? A mainstream media outlet caught wind of the story and ran with it. People started talking about it, and then it just kind of went away. But the story is really worth looking at more deeply, so let's do that together because the thinking in it fuels the plant-based movement. The minds cited in the original article are very influential among the same people who have the power to try to impose a plant-based diet on people. And this thinking is, more broadly speaking, very present among even policymakers in the sustainability world. So let's take a look at this thing together. So let's go with the actual mainstream media headline first, from the Daily Mail. Should you save a dying stranger if you know they eat meat? Oxford philosopher controversially argues that it can be ethical to let them die because of the suffering they cause to animals. And he's not even a vegan. Argument stems from the great suffering a meat eater inflicts on animals in life. Experts say chickens in factory farms suffer for months in torturous conditions. So the lesser evil could be to let the carnivores die in emergencies, the expert claims. Even a promise to convert to veganism might not make them worth saving. Wow. It's a good summary of the article, actually, since I did actually read it. And we often, as carnivores, get accused of treating our way of life and outlook like it's a religion, but compared to that, we got nothing. I have a religion. I'm not interested in the second one, especially not one that's based on material things like food. Hard pass. Now, the funny thing is that the author said on Twitter that he didn't say in his article what the Daily Mail article claims he said. And that's funny because the Daily Mail piece quotes him rather extensively in the article. Now, his article was first published in the Journal of Controversial Ideas. I wish I'd started that myself. I have some articles that I could write and publish there, except they'd never publish the ideas I have, and I'd probably get destroyed in the public square if I did try to publish them. But it's a great idea for a peer-reviewed journal nonetheless. But let's get as close to the source material as we can, because the Daily Mail is known for getting a bit hyperbolic with their reporting. So, Dr. Plant's article is called The Meat Eater Problem, which isn't provocative at all. You know, that title sounds a little like the infamous question the Germans asked about a segment of their population back in the 1930s. That's very similar in phrasing and framing. Well, let's take a look at his article here, because having read it before recording this, I can tell you that he does in fact say the things the Daily Mail article says he does. I know, you're surprised about that too, I'm sure. Dr. Plant, yes, that is the author's name, starts by claiming that there are two commonly held moral beliefs. First, that we should save the life of a stranger if we encounter one who is in danger. I will grant him that. That is pretty much a universally held human value. The second claim I won't grant, which is that it's widely believed that we shouldn't eat meat if the animal suffered. It's not a widely held belief. It simply is not. Most people don't know much about animal processing and don't care even when you tell them about it. You show them pictures, yeah, they'll have a natural visceral reaction, but they don't really care. It's a simple fact. And the fact is that most animal processing, even in an industrial agricultural world, is not filled with suffering the way the advocates for plant-based everything make it sound. So no, I will not grant him that assumption. He's basing this entire thought exercise on a faulty premise. He characterizes it in this way, quote, "It is also widely believed that it is wrong to be a meat eater, someone who regularly consumes animal products produced from factory farms. This is on the grounds that this consumption requires creating animals who, due to the conditions in factory farms, live overall bad lives. While there are other reasons one might believe that meat eating is wrong, the environmental impact, the violation of animal rights, etc., here I only focus on those arising from animal suffering caused by factory farming, as it is the easiest way to generate the problem I shortly raise." Pause. The easiest way to generate the problem he's framing here. He's explicitly telling the reader that he is framing it in an explicit way that is not necessarily accurate. That's very revealing about his position. But let's continue with what he's saying here. "Many people hold both beliefs, and what's more, do not consider this conjunction problematic. The most obvious example is Peter Singer. He is the originator of the Shallow Pond case and encourages people to give to life-saving charities. He has publicly campaigned against factory farming on animal suffering grounds and advocated veganism for many years. The simultaneous acceptance of these two beliefs is common among moral philosophers, and increasingly in society at large." End quote. First, here's your next major problem. He cites Dr. Peter Singer, one of the most absolute reprobate minds of our time. Dr. Singer is a philosopher who would have been perfectly at home in the darker eras of human history, like that Germany I mentioned earlier. His views are fueled by a belief that animals are on the same moral level as human beings, which is a strange framing. And he promotes a moral worldview that is demonic in nature, with solutions that are so grotesque that you can't even talk about them on YouTube. Let me put it this way. If his political ideological position came from a different angle, he would be banned from the public square. But I'll describe him this way. If you ever acted on his philosophy in a logical way, you'd end up behind bars. So citing Singer is not a good look for anyone claiming to be making an ethical argument, unless you're trying to combat Singer's numerous errors. Well, let's continue. Here's the logic of Dr. Plant's argument. Quote, "Here in brief is the argument. We accept that doing or allowing harm is permissible and may be required when it is the lesser evil. To put the same thing differently, we are not required to do or allow the greater evil. Therefore, we wouldn't be required to save lives, even if we could do so easily, if that would be the greater evil. I argue that if we accept that meat eating is wrong, or on animal suffering grounds, then once we look at the details, it starts to look plausible that meat eating causes so much suffering that saving the lives of strangers would be the greater evil compared to not saving them, and would therefore not be required. Simply accounting for the existing concern for animal welfare reduces and may remove the obligations to rescue others." End quote. Think about what he just said there. Yes, fellow carnivores, ketovores, and people doing keto and animal-based, you cause so much suffering by eating a handful of animals a year compared to the grisly death toll inflicted by vegan and vegetarian agriculture. He goes on to compare it to the dilemma of saving the life of a drowning dictator. The root of the argument is the philosophy of utilitarianism, a school of philosophy that I'm well familiar with from my own studies, which can often reduce social costs and moral dilemmas to mere economic transactions or mathematical equations, meaning you just crunch the numbers and something is good or not based entirely on positive and negative numbers. Needless to say, this philosophical approach never works in its purest form, but Dr. Plant uses it here when he makes the justification for not saving a meat eater's life based on the following math. Quote, "This thesis combines moral and empirical premises I unpack later. Presumably, most readers will consider the strong anti-carnism thesis. I often shorten this to the strong thesis, is wildly implausible. There is simply no way eating meat causes that much suffering. The goal of the essay is to show that when one looks at the details, the strong thesis is surprisingly plausible, although not certain, despite the fact that this conclusion is deeply disturbing. The basic argument is this. For each year of meat eating by a human, that creates about 5 years of chicken life. So if we consider just that, and think that those animals have lives which are nearly as bad as human lives are good, then the strong thesis is no longer inconceivable. I consider many objections later, but none of them seem to offer a decisive reason to reject the strong thesis for someone who thinks meat eating is wrong, and animals in factory farms suffer intensely." End quote. A human life and a chicken life have similar value, according to him. I don't know where you get that 1 year of eating meat is the equivalent to 5 years of chicken suffering, or the underlying assumption that a human life is worth the same as a chicken's life. And remember, he says on Twitter that he didn't say what the Daily Mail article says he said. He claims they mischaracterize him. But then this is his conclusion from his article. Brace yourself for the audacity here. Quote, "I have argued that two widely accepted beliefs, we ought to save strangers and we ought not to eat meat from factory farms, are in deep and underappreciated tension. While we would not normally consider these beliefs to be relevant to each other, I pressed the straightforward problem that if we have those animal welfare concerns, then when we account for them, it reduces and may remove the obligation to rescue others." End quote. In other words, he does not say that it is reasonable to save people who eat meat. He bases this on two faulty ideological assumptions. The first, that an animal life and a human life are of equal merit and value. And second, that the strong anti-carnism thesis is valid. That thesis states that eating meat causes widespread suffering and is therefore bad. You have to ignore the quadrillions of animal lives lost every year in plant-based agriculture. He's combining utilitarian thinking with faulty ethics. So no, Dr. Plant's views are being correctly described in the Daily Mail article. I'll try to link both of those pieces in the comments section so you can read them for yourself instead of taking my word for it. But what do you think about this? You may not think that this is that big of a deal since it's just a philosopher trying to make a silly argument, but here's the thing. Dr. Peter Singer gets widely cited in the literature positively in areas like sustainable development and by plant-based advocates, including those public figures with enormous power. You know, those guys who are buying up all the farmland and telling us to not eat meat anymore. Why is that? Couldn't tell you, but he does, and that should concern everyone. These arguments matter, and they need to be debunked and exposed as deeply immoral. That's what I think about this. What do you think? So let me know in the comments, please. And like and subscribe if you haven't. It really does help. As does sharing this on social media, that helps a lot as well. I'm the Practical Carnivore, Anthony Stine, and thanks for watching.